So that's what's happened there. The largest soybean meal importing markets, you can see it's the EU 27 continues to be the largest, even though it's down somewhat this year. Then Indonesia, then Vietnam, then Thailand, then Korea, and then Japan, Mexico, Canada, the Philippines, and then down there Malaysia. This is the big growth area in the world for imports of soybean meal. This is in Southeast Asia. This is the place where you've got palm oil, so what do you need beans for and oil for? So you're going to bring in meal. And you're growing your poultry industry, you're growing your swine industry. It's it's an area that's really expanding. This is U.S. soybean meal exports, or soybean exports. We had a record this last year, and that's pretty phenomenal in the midst of one of the worst recessions the world has ever gone through. We had record exports. You can thank China for that. They had record imports. But also, the reduction in South American availability gave us good exports toward the end of our marketing year. And now USDA is saying we're probably going to have a record exports again this year because of a lack of supply, competition from South America. We'll talk about a bit more in a minute. The limiting factor to how many soybeans we can export in the next marketing year is how many we can physically get to the port and out and on a ship. We're going to find out what our capacity is in the next 4 or 5 months. And, you know, I think all of you that are in the trade know this. If you want soybeans from the United States for December shipment, you better buy them because you can't probably get them in November. It's booked. Everything is through the system is pretty well booked. So everyone needs to be moving. And that's, again, a situation. Look at ending stocks. Soybeans in the U.S. Record low, 13-day supply before harvest. And we haven't, in fact, I think it will be lower at the end of September than it was at the end of August because our crop is so late. We need to, in fact, get those harvested, but we're not getting it done. And today, things are so tight, $2.40, 50 cents a bushel premium over Chicago over November for soybeans. They're down in Arkansas and in Mississippi today spraying soybeans with defoliants to try to get them to harvest quicker so they can put them on a barge and not ship them to New Orleans, but ship them to Illinois to crush because the premium's so high in the Midwest today. But as soon as we get the harvest going, of course, that goes away, and all these premiums go away when the supply hits. This is U.S. exports of soybeans to China and the rest of the world. Look at that. We exported more soybeans this year to China than the rest of the world combined. I'm not I'm not particularly comfortable with that. I know in sales, I never like to have a whole lot of my business tied up in one customer that could leave to go somewhere else, and all of a sudden, any thought I ever had of a bonus is gone. But here's a case where it's a very, I don't say a difficult relationship between the U.S. and China. I think it is, in fact, a guarded relationship between the U.S. and China. There's no question China is on the ascendancy. It is, in fact, seeing itself as a larger world player. It's building up its navy. It's wanting to have influences all around the world. And in that respect, there are great opportunities for clashes between the U.S. and China. With good leadership on both sides, I hope we can avoid that. But if we have a problem, whether it be over Taiwan, South China Sea, you name it, there will be a tendency for some politicians in the U.S. when that clash comes to, in fact, say, well, we don't want to export to China, or for China to say, we're not going to buy from them. And, of course, all the trade would get rearranged in the world, and the world will still get what they want, but it would be a real mess. So one thing that I really hope for is leaders in the United States and China who really work hard to avoid those conflicts, because the soybean industry and you as traders and users have got the potential to be greatly impacted if things go wrong. Here's the key if you want to, I mentioned about exports. These are export sales at the last week of August in 2008 and the last week of August in 2009 for the next marketing year. You can see a year ago we had 7.6 million tons booked for the next year, 4.2 of that to China. This year we've got 14 million tons booked. and 8.8 million tons of that for China. That's the stuff that's going to be going out early in the marketing year. And that's why we've got fobbing capacity booked up through November probably, and is moving into December, because those supplies are there. Now some will say, well, China could cancel a lot of that, and they potentially could. Not for long. If they want to run their crush plants up until the South American crop's there, they're going to have to buy soybeans in the U.S. because they're not available anywhere else. So just to give you an idea of what's happening in terms of purchases. Vegetable oil stocks to use ratio, downward. Even though we've got record stocks of soybean oil in the United States, world stocks are going down because we've expanded the use of both in food, but particularly expansion in the area of biodiesel and other industrial products. So that we're pulling stocks down, down, down. And that, in fact, is an issue, because if El Nino does cause a sustained period of low rainfall here in Southeast Asia, you could see palm oil production cut back 5 or 6 months from now and really tighten up global stocks very much at that point. India, this is another player in the market. I think it's the big enigma. Somebody says, well, what's going on in India? And I said, who in the hell knows? Particularly the Indians. It is, when you've got 700 or 800 million people farming, maybe you got 50 million of them growing soybeans, little bitty plots. Anybody that says they know what India has doesn't know. But clearly the statistics, USDA says this, others say Indian production is expanding. I'm not sure about that. Clearly cottonseed is, because they are now growing biotech cotton and they're making a lot higher yields, and their farmers are planting a lot more cotton, so they're getting cottonseed produced. Not much growth in peanuts. In fact, this year it's going to be down probably because of the bad monsoon. And rapeseed has expanded, but again, how much it can grow. And then, of course, sunseed is very limited at the top. But again, it shows you that there is growth in production there. But if you look at soybean meal, which is the more significant one, because the soybean meal, India is exporting quite a bit of meal, you can see that growth, there is internal consumption growth, but the export volume is growing faster than consumption. Now, those are official USDA numbers. I'm not one that believes the number that well on India, because number one, I think consumption is higher than what USDA is estimating. I think production is lower. I mean, look at this. This is soybean meal exports occurred from October 2007 through August 2008. You saw 5 million tons. Now, they said the crop this year was as big as the last year, but they only exported 2.9. Either they're consuming a whole lot more soybean meal than anybody says they are, and nobody agrees with that. There's a lot of soybeans sitting around, which nobody knows where they are, or the crop last year wasn't as big as they said it was. Obviously, I think it's a combination of yield consumption being a bit higher than what they say, and the crop last year being no more than 8 million tons, rather than 10 that or some are saying. I think Tom Mielke speaking next, and I think your latest estimate I saw was 7.9 or something like that. So that just gives you an idea of the situation there. Now let's move to a few more markets. Here's Japan. Used to be the biggest soybean export market for the U.S., but their imports of soybeans have gone down because their crushing industry wasn't able to compete with imports of meal and oil, and they consolidated that industry. Now the imports of soybeans for food and other non-crush uses is pretty stable in that market, but it's in fact it's the imports for beans for consumption as for crushing that's gone down. Now let's look at Southeast Asia. Imports of soybeans and soybean meal. You can see the growth has been in soybean meal. The soybeans that come into the region are coming mainly into Thailand, Malaysia, and for crushing, and into Indonesia for food. Minor amounts elsewhere in the region. So that just gives you an idea of what's happening in the region. Indonesia, imports of